So I'm gonna make this short and sweet because I hate talking. So Stephen asked me to talk even before we went to the trip if I would talk when we got back, and I said I'd think about it. And after I went, I came back and I said I kind of have to now to kind of let everybody know what's going on. So the crazy part of the trip, we first got there, we went from the airport to the 4-hour trip to the orphanage. Saw a lot of crazy things, stuff I probably wasn't prepared to see. You see it on TV all the time, people struggling in different third world countries and stuff. But to actually witness it firsthand was kind of crazy and very eye-opening. When we got to the orphanage, they have it a little bit better off, I think, than the rest of the city. I mean, you see people on the way to the orphanage bathing in little, whatever body waters they could find, even like next to livestock they were bathing. It was kind of crazy. So they have it a little bit better off over there. But they really, really need help. The orphanage we stayed at has utility power for the most part, although every night at the evening worship, halfway through we'd lose power. So we would just sing and pray in the dark. But they didn't care. They were just joyous and just ready to go. Didn't break stride. Prayers kept going, songs kept going, so I think they're kind of used to it. But I'm sure they can still use some help there as well. But the other orphanage where we actually did most of our work at has no utility power at all. So we just put a bunch of solar panels up, got them, I think, 12 lights there, roughly. And they were very appreciative of the lights we put up. 4 of the lights have little remotes with them, and we gave it to the lady that was working at the orphanage, and it was like best thing since sliced bread. When she saw that light come on with that remote, her smile was ridiculous. So she was very appreciative, and everybody there was very appreciative. So I know we need to go back. I don't know if we're going in the fall, or it really depends, I think, what we can raise these funds. But I know Stephen says, I mean, it's going to be pretty expensive, so I know we need to help. I was looking at some systems, and they range anywhere to get them fully functional, as far as, because I know they have a well pump or something they need to get pumping so they have fresh water. They have lights now, but no outlet, so they can't really plug anything in other than unless they power up their generator, which gas there is pretty expensive, so they can't really rely on that. So I know we need to get power out there. So the systems I was looking at range anywhere from like $3,000 to $10,000, depending on how elaborate you want to get. So I know we definitely need help raising those funds, and then to send us all back over again is not going to be cheap. So if you can just pray on it, if you can afford to maybe give a monetary donation, that'd be great. If not, just please continue to pray that we can make this happen for those people over in Haiti. Thanks.
So there are several major characters in this morning's readings. We have Jairus, we have his daughter, the woman, the disciples, the crowds, and of course, who am I leaving out? Jesus. Okay, someone's paying attention. Jesus, yes. As I was studying this text again and again, I was drawn to the actions of 2 of these characters, and that's Jairus and the woman. All these other characters are important, but today, this morning, for the most part, I want us to look at these 2 characters and their faiths and appreciate the faiths of both Jairus and the woman. This text begins with a declaration of Jairus' faith. It says, "Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. And he pleaded earnestly with him, 'My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live.'" At first glance, at first reading of this, it doesn't seem out of place to any of us. It seems like something that we've come to know with Jesus. As he goes about, people come to him and ask for healing in their lives. Let's take a look at Jairus. Jairus, we are told, is a leader of the synagogue. He is a well-educated man, someone familiar with Scripture, a teacher, and most likely well-respected based on his position. This man knows that there is something in his life that he can't fix alone, but that God, through Jesus, can help. And so he goes and makes a very public declaration of his faith in Jesus to bring wholeness to his family. This statement is a risk. A risk because we've seen how Jesus talks to other religious leaders. Is it always really nice? No. No, he says things like, you hypocrites, or he calls a group of them a brood of vipers. It's also a risk because we know some of the religious leaders dislike Jesus and plan to put an end to his ministry, and therefore they dislike the people who associate with Jesus. In the midst of all of this risk, Jairus follows his faith and falls at the feet of Jesus and pleads for help. He lowers himself physically, spiritually, communally. And immediately following this, we are introduced to the woman. She isn't named. The author might never have known her name. She is at the lowest station in life, the very opposite of Jairus. We read, "And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering." This woman risks being noticed. She's in the crowds. She most likely shouldn't be around others. We're told that if her community was actively devout, they wouldn't want to be around someone who was so outwardly unclean. From bleeding to her poverty, we're clear in understanding she is in the crowd, but less than the crowd. In theirs and even in the disciples' eyes, she is less than. When Jesus stops to see who touched him, the disciples say, quote, "You see the people crowding against you, and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?' Why bother? Why bother looking for her? She's nothing. She is unseen." So much risk, but this woman seeks out Jesus and touches him. But that's not the end of her faith statement. Jesus calls out to see who touched him, and the woman shows herself. We read, "Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. And he said to her, 'Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering.'" How terrifying that must have been. When Jesus calls to us, many of us run and hide. We don't want to be seen. We might not even want to be known. The sins that we have, the bad intentions, the anger, the hate, we all harbor evil in our lives. And so when Jesus calls out, it's easier and more comfortable to stay hidden. However, this woman, she comes forward. She falls at his feet. She tells him it was her and why, and Jesus calls her daughter and says, "You are freed from your suffering." On first reading, and on my first reading this week, and probably in ours when we first heard it, we might think suffering is only in reference to her bleeding. But I wonder if there's something more. Jesus' healing stories are about restoration to wholeness. The toll that being sick for 12 years, spending all your money on that illness only to see it get worse, the begging, the look of disgust, the breakdown of relationships, being marginalized from the community. These are all very real sufferings to a person in this woman's situation. And here, because she acted on her faith, Jesus is telling her that she is freed from all of that. He names her as his daughter. She is now seen by the community. He made sure of it. And now she can be part of the whole again. He heals her, restores her, stops what he is doing to validate her. We're not even done with this story, and we already have these two amazing examples of faith. And I kept looking for the word that best encapsulates their faith, their boldness, their chutzpah, their ability to live into their calling in these moments as there is risk all around. And it took me most of the week to land on the word. Actually, Deb had to come in and say, I want to print the bulletins. What's the title of the sermon? When I said, Audacious. Because the definition of audacious, there's two of them. The first is showing a willingness to take surprisingly bold risks. This is the definition that fits Jairus and this woman. But the second definition is showing an impudent lack of respect. I think this is how so many of us treat our faiths and one another. So within this one adjective that can be attached to faith, we are presented with a choice. Are we willing to be like Jairus and this woman, to take bold risks in pursuit of our callings? Because Jesus affirms this kind of faith. The story continues after the woman is healed and freed from her sufferings. We read, while Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead, they said. Why bother the teacher anymore? And overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, don't be afraid, just believe. He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they had come to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep. But they laughed at him. And after he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him. He went in where the child was. He took her by the hand, and he said to her, Talitha cum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. And immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. At this they were completely astonished. Jesus continues on to heal Jairus' daughter. Both the woman and Jairus, people on opposite ends of just about every social, economic, and political spectrum, are brought to wholeness through Jesus. The woman freed from her sufferings, Jairus reunited with a child torn from him at such a young age. So there's that second definition to audacious, showing an impudent lack of respect. And it's present in these stories. Look at the crowds. They push against Jesus. They get in Jesus' way. They make loud and obnoxious noise. They laugh at him. They show an impudent lack of respect. And so he sends them away. He puts them all out. And he surrounds himself with people who believe. They have their questions and their doubts, but they believe and are willing to follow Jesus even through death. So today we've read and heard about two audacious people. We've heard about Jesus' response to affirm those who follow the call through the risks and judgments of others. We've heard from an audacious person in our midst as Todd spoke about him answering the call to go to Haiti. We've heard from the audacious people of Foyer des Enfants de la Providence in Haiti. And we know there are many more with the audacious faith of Jairus and the woman around us, people who've stepped up to serve in Christ's name through Impact Massillon, through stewarding our grounds, tithing 10% of their income to God's ministry, standing up for the oppressed, marching for equality, people who will stand against the immoral, people who serve to make sure these words may always be true, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are all endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We know There are those who have the faiths to say that creating trauma for children is always unethical and intolerable. The faiths of people who stop at nothing to make sure the hungry are fed, the naked are clothed, the sick and imprisoned are visited and loved. And Jesus affirms these audacious faiths to service to God's calling. But then there are the crowds. And I wonder if we live into our callings. We possess these faiths, but do we answer boldly like Jairus and the woman, like Todd and Greg and Jerita, or do we sit back with the crowds, naysaying, mocking, judging? Our faiths do not always make life easy and comfortable. Our faiths are about leading us to restoration, wholeness, and we cannot be whole if our community, our world, is fractured. We cannot be whole until we all are freed from our sufferings. Jesus heals first the woman, who in our world is the lesser, the marginalized, but he doesn't stop there. He still continues on and heals Jairus' daughter. Those on the margins are served, and he still comes for us. So as we get ready to celebrate our independence in the ways that we are blessed to be living in this country, I do want us to ask this question of ourselves. When Jesus calls for us, how will we live into his call? With boldness and conviction? I pray we do. Amen.